And we're off on another episode of the Suppress Herald podcast. And it's a Monday, the 18th of March, day after St. Patrick's Day. And here we go. It's been an interesting week. And, one thing I can say is reviewing these papers, and as you've followed these podcasts, if you have, you know that every week I go through all of the papers for the week and I determine what the liberal, conservative, neutral bent is on the number of articles, letters to the editor, editorial on the editorial page of the paper. And I just am so sick of this. And the propaganda is just reached a level that's ridiculous, really. And you can just go through this and see again and again and again that this paper is nothing but a propaganda sheet. And it's really repetitive. And as I've said, I've kept track, and it's 5-1 liberal letter to the editor versus conservative. That doesn't mean there's times more many liberals than conservatives in the state of Maine. It may mean that in the downtown Portland, Maine, where this paper is headquartered, as far as their offices go, that may be the case. But the general opinion is not that way. But you would think, if you read this rag of a Suppress Herald, that that's what you'll be getting. And just to go through, I'm just going to read off on the daily. They don't have a Monday paper, so on Tuesday you had humanitarian approach urgently needed in Gaza. In other words, the anti-Israel lobby. President Biden's policies benefit all Americans. So that's a pro-Biden, anti-Trump trope. Maine drug policy reform is essential. In other words, decriminalize drugs. That worked out well out in Oregon, and where they're rolling it back, they decriminalized drugs and had a major disaster. That the person writing this put in a pushback and saying that, oh, no, decriminalizing works. Well, everywhere it's been tried, it doesn't work. It's a disaster. And it's this is common sense, but this is the don't believe your lying eyes thing. And then you've got, with or without Trump, the US is turning its back on the world. In other words, the warmongers want us to get involved all over the world. And then you've got, with sea levels rising, Mainers need to rise up. So that's the global warming. That's the anti-Trump, pro-Biden. That's the, another just liberal general cause. And so there's two anti-Trump tropes and one, global warming. Here's the next day. We must resist the national lunge toward ignorance. In other words, this is pro the yeah, you can't even keep track anymore. But basically, it's African American studies and changing history to suit the DEI agenda. This one is really rich. For one night, Biden was the media master as Trump was fumbling. Biden performed well enough last week to reap the full benefit of our low expectations. In other words, don't believe your lying eyes. I'm saying Trump was the master of the media for a night, yelling and screaming, and on whatever it was he was on, Ritalin or other stimulants to keep him going for the night. And then he, of course, disappeared for a day. And then you've got, at age 90, I no longer vote Republican. So that's an anti-Trump trope. Gun waiting periods can save countless lives. That's the anti-gun lobby. Images of Lewiston shooter are too much. That's the gun lobby. And of course, what's happening here in Maine is the Maine legislature, liberal Maine legislature, is trying to pass gun laws. And then you've got a make or break year for the environment. And this is, if elected, Donald Trump will dismember the EPA and make decisions that condemn us to decades of regrettable consequences. That's the global warming whack jobs. and the anti-Trump. So that was Wednesday. Moving on to Thursday. Inflation isn't the real problem for the economy. Lack of housing is. We're going to get into housing a little more. What you won't see in this paper, and I've read this online, finding real news, is in cities across the country, you've got real estate, either real estate investment trusts or real estate companies, investment groups, buying up thousands and thousands of residential single family homes. You think we have a problem with not being able to buy, to find starter homes for young people, for lower income people, affordable housing? That's because the investment banks, and this goes all the way to BlackRock and others, State Street in Boston, they're buying up real estate, and a lot of it is single family homes in huge numbers and turning them into rentals. Now, what do you think the rental rate goes if a two or three homeowners that have got thousands of homes in a real estate market own those homes? What do you think is going to happen to the rent? What do you think is going to happen to the value of houses? Investment banks are now destroying the American dream. We need to investigate and look into that more closely. But I have read the stories where they have done the research in cities across America where a few real estate companies are buying up very large quantities of single family homes. Secure better gun laws in Maine. Okay, there's the gun. Supreme Court should cancel summer recess. In other words, they want to be able to hear these cases before the election because they want to get Trump. Forget the rule of law, forget the process that normally happens with going through a Trump's all these cases. The lawfare is all garbage. It's all local prosecutors, local judges working completely outside of the law. And so now what you're going to have is going to appeal, and then all the way through there's a process. It goes to different jurisdictions on appeal and ends up going to the next court, and then ultimately ends up in the Supreme Court. So this person is saying we need to just get right to the Supreme Court and let them make they cancel their summer because we got an election and we got to beat Trump. So we got to basically bend to the law so that we can, they've always already found Trump. This is what you've got in a lot of these jurisdictions where Trump has been charged, is you've got people that have already decided he's guilty before he even gets into court. And this is just a perfect example of that. And is Biden the best his party has to offer? This is actually one conservative that says, Biden ain't too great. That got snuck in there. They made one conservative letter got printed. Let's pass a budget that commits to a thriving Maine. There's the liberals want to spend money. So there's another day. And moving on, let's go to, this is on Friday. We must move away from fossil fuels. Yeah, ruin us all. Energy is the core of everything. Let's get rid of half the energy or more, and let's get rid of 80% of our energy and see what happens. These people are idiots, but they're driven by this drivel that gets in the paper every single day, every single week, every single month, continuous. Climate change, fossil fuels, CO2, carbon, it's all the same. So here we have, next day is, let's get rid of fossil fuels, global warming. Religious schools should not get state funding. That's an interesting one. Separation church and state and all that. And they're saying that, we should not fund these schools that don't want us to teach that boys can be girls, girls can be boys, and all of this. And I'll just add infinitum. It goes on forever. Let me tell you something. I think we should defund public schools that are teaching this crap and grooming children to ruin their lives, to screw up their heads, to make them basically lose their minds. boys thinking they're girls and girls thinking they're boys. It's ridiculous. And the general public knows this, but not in this paper. And then you've got, we don't really disagree on gun safety, do we? So we've got climate change, we've got, anti-religious schools, anti-religion, prioritizing democracy over immigration. So that's pro-immigration. And you've got take the guns. Pretty consistent every single day. And then you've got the next day on the Friday. Why would a rape survivor endorse Donald Trump? This is about South Carolina Representative Nancy Mace. She was on with George Stephanopoulos. Now remember, George Stephanopoulos ran the war room for Clinton when he had accusers came out during his campaign. It was George Stephanopoulos, his campaign manager, who assembled the war room, including Hillary, and took out those women, basically focused on discrediting them, destroying them. So this is George Stephanopoulos, and they're saying that, Trump was a rapist because he lost this civil case with E. Jean Carroll, who's a wackadoodle. He never could put any of the evidence in that she is a wackadoodle and that she was just off her rocker. That wasn't allowed. But let's remember, the jury, did not find him guilty of rape, which was what she had claimed and accused him of. Instead, they said, well, nah, he didn't rape her, but he sexually molested her. She didn't even know what year this all happened. She didn't even know anything. And there's zero evidence other than her claims that any of this happened. And it was, what, 18, 20 years ago, something like that. But here's the piece in the paper. They just, they're shameless. And it's basically, that's a week of lib. And that's all you get. Meanwhile, I just want to mention a couple of things. I call it the suppress Herald. And the reason is that it's not all about what they do print and what letters they do publish. It's about what they don't. And I can guarantee you that there are a very good quantity of letters from conservatives, either supportive of Trump, critical of Biden and his administration and his policies. There are pro Second Amendment, don't keep passing laws to limit our freedom to defend ourselves, especially in a country that's becoming more and more lawless. And beyond that, pro-life. There are plenty of letters written to this paper, although most people, not most, but a good number of people have given up knowing that those letters just go into the circular slide or circular file cabinet at the paper and are never going to get published. And that's a valid point, but they do get plenty. I mentioned in my last podcast, I wrote a letter to the editor after the Supreme Court said it's completely unconstitutional, 9-0. And again, I said, if you lose in this Supreme Court with these extremely liberal judges that are on the court on that side, if you lose 9-0, you should quit whatever you were doing as a lawyer, as a prosecutor, as in this case, Secretary of State Shenna Bellows, trying to take Trump unilaterally without any legal basis off the ballot on the primary here in Maine. She dropped that after the Supreme Court decision, but really she should be removed from office if she didn't just quit. That was egregious and it never should have happened. So you'll never see those letters. But here's some other stories that have been going on. I just have a couple of them that have gone on that we see nothing, absolutely nothing in this paper about these things. here's a story that's been out in just a couple of days, and I see nothing in the papers. Riley Gaines, if you remember, she was the swimmer from the University of Kentucky who had to share the podium with a guy in women's swimming. And she was not happy at all. She also had to share a locker room with a guy swinging around in the locker room. But worse than the locker room, I think, is having to share the podium. That guy who was ranked, I don't know, 300th in the men's ended up being a national champion in women's. And she didn't stand for this. And so Riley Gaines is out there. Now she has a number of athletes have sued the NCAA for this and said, this can't go on. You cannot have men swimming, playing volleyball, playing sports with women. It's an unfair situation, and we don't want men in the women's locker rooms. There's not a word in this paper about that lawsuit. Another thing, they do have an international section, and you hear nothing about what's going on in Europe. Not one article. Europe has had major pushback against the globalists and the European Union, the people that are running Europe. And the farmers is the biggest one, and that's an easy story. Farmers have been told by the European Union that they're going to take their cows. They have to slaughter two-thirds major, we're talking about slaughtering millions of animals. And, the farmers are looking at that going, well, if I can only keep half as many cows, I can't make enough money to make a living as a farmer anymore, which may be what they're after. But they're talking about destroying farms in Europe. And the farmers have risen up, driving their tractors into cities. I saw one very funny scene. It was a video of a honey wagon, basically, that a farmer towed into the city. And when he came up against a police line, he turned around, backed up with a honey wagon, and started spraying down the streets with basically liquid manure. And the police, isn't that funny? They retreated. But these farmers have said enough, and the European Union is saying, okay, we're not going to do this. It's not a done deal, and they don't give up easily. But those are just two examples of the suppression of real news that's happening around this country, this state, and internationally. You never see that in this paper. It's egregious. It really should never happen that way. And, I didn't finish. I went through Saturday. Now I got the Sunday paper. And just to finish the week, Maine residents can conserve their way to a more stable environment. And, I just have one line in here, but it's basically the global warmists. Nature has amazing tools to address the climate crisis, but conserving nature takes people. There's so little perspective on all of this. I mean, I grew up in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and quite honestly, what our forefathers did to this country from a pollution standpoint is egregious. Absolutely. The distance we've come since when they just, throw it in the lake, throw it in the river, dump, pump, whatever, put it in the water, it'll disappear. The distance we've come is unbelievable, really. But a lot of young people don't have any perspective on that. But here you've got, so there's the global warming. And another thing that's happening here in Maine is that the legislature is trying to pass a shield law to prevent other states' attorneys general or other states from holding physicians in the medical field here in Maine accountable if somebody from another state that has laws against transitioning children, gender transition, changing boys to girls, girls to boys, which I believe is just plain evil. And parents that allow it should be put in jail. Children don't know. They haven't gone even through puberty yet. And yet they're saying, well, let's take this little boy's penis off and ruin his life forever. Or let's turn this little girl, tell her she's a boy, and ruin her life forever. And so the state is trying to pass a law to shield doctors so that we can become a destination state for people that want to change their gender. And of course, our view is the editorial board at the Suppress Herald. Attacks on healthcare shield law no more than election year posturing. The effort by 16 Republican attorneys general to intimidate Maine needs to be seen for what it is. Yeah. It is egregious what's happening with that. We won't spend too much time, but this is what they're doing is California, and Maine is trying to follow California in a lot of ways. EV mandates requiring our car dealerships to sell a majority of electric vehicles in Maine, which is in no way, shape, or form going to be ready for that now or in the next 10 years. And nor do we want it. And then you've got, we can't get gun safety laws wrong this time. So there's the new gun restrictions. Ahead of election, let's hold polluters to account. That's the global warming. Workplace inequality should be consigned to the past. That's the communists. We got it all. That's the Sunday paper. So that's just a sampling of what I'm seeing every single week. And it's basically disgusting that we have to deal with this every single week. This is the paper that's supposed to be news and is nothing more than a propaganda sheet. And it's local. And I think I've said politics is local and so is propaganda. And I'm reminded every time I do this exercise. Here's the week in review on the editorial side, what they print in the paper and choose to put in. Why U.S. weather disasters cost so much. I've talked about this before. U.S. weather disasters cost so much because we put all this expensive property, expensive real estate on the beach. Beach property is very attractive, and the price of beach property is skyrocketed. And as a result of that, when you have a high mark, when you have a unusual, what they call flood tide, combined with a storm with low pressure, and you get unusually high water, you're going to have more damage. But one thing that we don't have is more storms. That's statistics and data. And we don't have necessarily higher tides. As I said, there was a storm here in January that was a major storm, major damage, really impactful. But then you find out that we had one of those 50 years ago that took out some of the same, in the same location, some of the same shacks and so forth. So you have to keep it in perspective, but this is an agenda. This is a huge agenda. Experts say increasingly early ice outs on Maine waters open up new problems. Now it's a warm winter. We had a warm winter and we had some rain. Let me tell you who didn't have a warm winter. Florida. Everybody I know that's down in Florida has been complaining about how cold it's been down in Florida. Good friend who has a place in Stuart, Florida on the East Coast. Went down there the first 2 weeks. He said I couldn't even put shorts on. He likes to ride his Harley. He had to put on a winter jacket to ride his Harley. And this was in the wintertime in Florida. So I don't know, global warming means it's warm everywhere, but Florida's been cold, the South has been cold, and we'll get into more of these details. People are starting to figure out that the data doesn't support the narrative. And here's the Biden administration ways change that could retire some coal-fired plants earlier. Yeah, let's shut down all our energy and make what we have very expensive. Let's follow Germany down the tubes. Germany closed all of its coal plants, and it even closed its nuclear plants, relied on wind and solar. Electricity went to 50 cents a kilowatt hour, and people couldn't pay their electric bill and were freezing, and their houses, the lights were out. Major problems. Manufacturing in Germany took a major hit because manufacturing, there are a lot of robotics are electric machines. Welding uses electricity, lots of it. A lot of manufacturing requires machines that run on electricity. And when you double or triple or quadruple the price of electricity, guess what? Manufacturing gets really expensive and your competitiveness gets really takes a hit. And Germany is suffering. Here's a really good one. This is a hit piece, and this is not worthy of being even printed, and yet they did. This would never happen if this was a Democrat, but you have a Republican in Ohio running for the United States Senate, Bernie Moreno, and the headline, Trump-backed candidate questioned about his past. And it goes into a whole accusation that he, let's see here, Bernie Murray merged with the nomination. He was on a men about the existence of a 2008 profile seeking men for one-on-one sex on a casual sex website called Adult Friend Finder. And somebody went back and dug this up a long time ago, 2008. Okay, 2008, 16 years ago. And at the end of the article, okay, and this is how they do this, all the way at the end, on Thursday evening, 2 days after the AP first asked Marinos. Okay, now remember, this is after this came out on Thursday evening. 2 days after the AP first asked Marino's campaign about the account, the candidate's lawyer said a former intern created the account as a prank. The lawyer provided a statement from the intern, Dan Ritchie, who said he created the account as part of a juvenile prank. I am thoroughly embarrassed by the aborted prank I pulled on my friend and former boss, Bernie Moreno, nearly 2 decades ago, Ritchie said. The AP couldn't independently confirm Ritchie's statement, and he didn't immediately respond to messages. So we printed it. We couldn't confirm his statement, but you also couldn't confirm that it was legitimate, but you printed it anyway. That's propaganda meant to harm Moreno on the eve of his primary because they know that he is a major threat to take out Sherrod Brown, Senator of Ohio, who is an extremely liberal, very poor voting record for the people of Ohio, and very much at risk of losing his seat to Bernie Moreno. I don't think it's going to matter. I think he's going to win anyway. Here's another one, local and state. Activists say Maine PERS, which is the retirement account for public employees, retirement system, not divesting from fossil fuels. In other words, they're supposed to divest from fossil fuels. Get out of the energy business. Yeah, that'll work well for your retirement. This is happening all over these handful of extremist acts, convincing people to do what's not in their best interest, all under the guise of saving the planet. Was not doing a podcast, nothing but global warming. Here's another article. Again, I told you what they don't print, things that are important happening both globally and locally and nationally. Equal education, unequal earnings. Why does a gender pay gap still exist in 2024? Women are not getting the same job with the same education as men. Let me tell you something. Education in this country, education in the United States has gone to hell. When I was running, and this was a Swiss company, I was running their division in the United States. And so I was the national sales and marketing manager, basically ran the whole division. And I interviewed people for jobs, and I was just interviewing basically an office manager. It was a multitask job. We were a small division, and so a lot of multitasking. So you were looking for somebody with some skills. I had 2 people with MBAs apply for that job. One of them, her resume was one big run-on sentence, was unintelligible. But I do remember there were some very, at the time, very funny anecdotal sentences in her resume that I was just amazed that she would actually apply for a job and hand that to me. And this is somebody with an MBA. So do not tell me that we have a gender problem with people that have the same education. Education is no longer a judge or an indicator, a predictor of your ability in the workplace at all. Education should never be used as the basis for equality in pay, because nobody trusts education. Nobody trusts that degree anymore because we've ruined our schools. A lot of schools are just creating young little activists. I've talked before about these people that are environmental studies. Environmental studies is basically a global warming activist degree. And for the most part, people I've run into who have environmental studies degrees are absolutely clueless about actual science, about actual data, about actual real world information and what's actually happening. So, in a nutshell, that is it. And then the last anecdote here, and this is once again the same thing. Is it National Women's Week or something like that, or National Women's Day? There was something going on. On many comics pages, women artists are scarce. Sorry about that little glitch there. Something going on, but this is just a wing it podcast. So we're just going to carry on and finish. And on many comics pages, women artists are scarce. Once again, nobody's judging these comics by whether it's a woman or a man who was doing the comics. It's purely by who likes the comics. If a woman does a good comic, she's no doubt going to get published. That is just the most ridiculous article. And this, I'm just so sick of everybody's a victim. Today it's women. The other day it's minorities. It's LGBTQFU. It never ends. And these articles are not even worthy of being in a paper and being written. But if you are running a globalist propaganda operation and you want to make sure that there are plenty of victims and victimhood so that you can create division, then you just keep writing those articles. It's garbage and we shouldn't accept it. Once again, The Suppress Herald, another week, another very consistent guns, global warming, and liberal causes. Anti-Trump, pro-Biden. It's not so much pro-Biden as just basically propping up Biden and telling people, don't believe your lying eyes. Don't believe that Biden is incompetent. Don't believe that Biden is too old to manage or run or lead anything. And that's where we're at. And this paper for the whole week just propped up those same. And when you do that consistently like that, you can't call it anything but propaganda. So once again, here we are, our local papers across Maine, owned by billionaires through the National Trust for Local News, national distrust of local news. And we've got a major propaganda operation going. Politics is local, and so is propaganda. And that's our podcast for today.